David pulled into his driveway after another long day at the accounting firm, looking forward to a quiet evening in his backyard. He had worked hard to buy this house in Meadowbrook Gardens, a nice subdivision with tree-lined streets and well-maintained homes. The HOA fees were steep, but he figured it was worth it for the peace of mind and property values. That peace of mind started cracking just 2 weeks after he moved in. It was a Tuesday morning when David first noticed the white patrol car parked in front of his house. He was getting ready for work when he saw a security guard in a crisp uniform walking around his property with a clipboard. The man was taking notes and photos of his fence, mailbox, and front yard. David stepped outside, still holding his coffee mug. "Excuse me, is everything okay?" The guard looked up with a practiced smile. "Just doing a routine property inspection, sir. Making sure everything meets community standards." "Oh, okay. Is there a problem?" "Well, your mailbox seems to be positioned about 6 inches too far from the curb. And I noticed some dandelions in your front flower bed that need attention." David glanced at his mailbox, then at his neighbor's mailbox, which looked exactly the same distance from the street. He also looked at the tiny yellow flowers the guard was pointing to. They were barely visible among his carefully planted petunias. "I can take care of those," David said, though he was confused. The previous homeowner had installed that mailbox and the HOA had approved the house sale just a month ago. "Great. You'll receive a written notice in the mail with a 7-day compliance deadline. Have a good day, sir." David watched the guard walk back to his patrol car and drive away. He looked around the neighborhood and noticed that several other houses had mailboxes in similar positions. Mrs. Chen next door even had a small crop of dandelions that were much more obvious than his few tiny ones. The written notice arrived 3 days later. It was official looking, printed on HOA letterhead, and listed violations he had never heard of. Apparently, his fence needed immediate attention for paint, touch-ups. His mailbox required repositioning to meet setback requirements, and his landscaping needed weed removal and maintenance. David spent that weekend painting his fence, which looked perfectly fine to him, and carefully removing every single dandelion he could find. He even measured his mailbox position and moved it to match the exact distance specified in the HOA guidelines. 2 weeks later, the patrol car was back. This time, David was working in his garage when he noticed the guard spending an unusually long time at his fence line. The man was leaning against the wooden posts, peering into his backyard and making notes on his clipboard. David timed it. The guard spent nearly 15 minutes just standing there. When David walked over to see what was happening, the guard straightened up quickly. "Another inspection?" David asked. "Yes, sir," following up on previous violations and checking for new ones. "What violations?" "I fixed everything from the last notice." The guard flipped through his papers. "Well, your fence appears to have some loose boards that could be a safety hazard. And I'm seeing some grass clippings near your back gate that constitute improper yard waste disposal." David looked at his fence. He had just painted it 2 weeks ago and checked every board. They were all secure. The grass clippings the guard mentioned were from when he had mowed that morning. Just a few pieces that had blown near the gate. "I can clean those up right now," David offered. "That's fine. But you'll still receive a notice. Violations are violations." David watched the guard leave, then walked the length of his fence. Everything looked perfect. He also noticed that his neighbor across the street had loose boards on his fence that were actually falling off, and the house 2 doors down had a pile of grass clippings sitting by their mailbox. Neither of those properties had patrol cars parked outside. The pattern continued week after week. Every Tuesday, like clockwork, the white patrol car would appear. Sometimes Wednesday, too. The guard would spend long periods examining David's property with a level of detail that seemed excessive. He would lean on the fence, peer over it, walk around the entire perimeter, and always find something wrong. David started keeping track. In 6 weeks, he received notices for having his trash can visible from the street 4 hours before pickup time, for having a garden hose that wasn't completely wound up, for having a small oil stain on his driveway from when his car had a minor leak, and for having outdoor furniture that was improperly positioned. Each violation came with a fine if not corrected within 7 days. David was spending entire weekends fixing problems that seemed invented. Meanwhile, he observed the guard's behavior with other houses. The patrol car would drive slowly past most homes, maybe stop for 2 or 3 minutes to check mailboxes or look at front yards, then move on. But at David's house, the guard would park and conduct what felt like investigations. He would measure things, take multiple photos from different angles, and spend 20 to 30 minutes examining every detail. David decided to test his theory. One Tuesday morning, he called in sick to work and watched from his living room window. The patrol car arrived at 9:15 a.m. and parked directly in front of his house. The guard got out with his clipboard and camera and began what David could only describe as a thorough examination of his property. The guard spent 5 minutes just looking at his mailbox from different angles. He walked the entire length of the fence, running his hands along the boards and taking pictures. He counted the decorative stones in David's flower bed. He even opened David's gate and stepped into the backyard to examine the area near his patio. After 45 minutes at David's house, the guard got back in his car and drove to the next street over. David followed at a distance and watched as the guard spent less than 5 minutes total at the next 4 houses, just driving slowly past and occasionally stopping to take a quick photo. The realization hit David like a cold slap. This wasn't random. This wasn't standard procedure. He was being singled out for reasons he could only guess at. David started researching HOA laws and his rights as a homeowner. He learned that while HOAs had broad authority to enforce community standards, they were supposed to apply rules fairly and consistently to all residents. What he was experiencing seemed to go far beyond normal enforcement. He also started paying closer attention to his neighbors and their properties. The house directly next to his had peeling paint on their fence, visible trash cans left out for days, and a front yard that was clearly not being maintained to the same standards David was being held to. Yet he never saw the patrol car spending extended time there. The breaking point came during week 8 of his residency in Meadowbrook Gardens. David was working from home when he heard voices outside. He looked out to see the guard talking to someone on a cell phone while standing in his driveway. "Yeah, I'm at the property now," the guard was saying. Same guy as usual. "I'll find something to write him up for." David felt his stomach drop. The guard wasn't even pretending to look for legitimate violations anymore. He was openly admitting that his goal was simply to find fault, regardless of whether David's property actually had any problems. That evening, David sat at his kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote down every interaction he had experienced with the HOA patrol. The dates, times, duration of inspection, specific violations cited, and fines imposed. He also noted his observations of how other properties were treated. The pattern was undeniable, and David realized he needed to start documenting everything much more carefully. His peaceful life in Meadowbrook Gardens had turned into something he never expected, and he suspected things were only going to get worse before they got better. He looked out his kitchen window at his perfectly maintained yard and wondered what tomorrow's violation notice would bring. David's documentation system started simple, a notebook where he wrote down dates and times. But as the harassment escalated, he realized he needed more than just handwritten notes. He needed proof that would hold up if this situation ever ended up in court. The tipping point came on a rainy Thursday morning in October. David was working from home when he heard his motion sensor alert go off. He had installed a basic security camera system the week before, mainly to monitor package deliveries. But when he checked the feed, he saw something that made his blood boil. The HOA patrol guard was standing in his backyard, not just near the fence or gate, but actually inside his property, examining his patio furniture and taking pictures of his sliding glass door. David grabbed his phone and rushed outside. The guard was now kneeling next to David's flower bed, apparently looking for something to cite. "Excuse me, but you're on my private property without permission," David said, trying to keep his voice steady. The guard stood up slowly, showing no sign of embarrassment or concern. "I'm conducting a routine inspection, sir. The HOA has authority to examine properties for compliance violations. Authority to examine, yes, but not authority to trespass on private property without notice or permission." The guard shrugged. "Your gate was unlocked. That doesn't give you the right to enter my backyard. I found several violations back here. Your patio furniture is positioned within 3 feet of your property line, which violates setback requirements, and you have decorative lighting that wasn't approved by the Architectural Review Committee." David looked at his simple string lights that he had hung across his patio. They were basic white LED lights, the kind sold at any hardware store. "Those lights are temporary decoration, and my patio furniture has been in the same position since I moved in." The previous owner had it arranged exactly the same way. Well, it's a violation now. You'll receive a written notice. David watched the guard leave through his side gate, making notes on his clipboard as he walked. The man spent another 10 minutes examining the outside of David's fence before finally returning to his patrol car. That afternoon, David drove through his neighborhood with a different perspective. He was looking for patio furniture, decorative lighting, and fence setbacks. What he found confirmed his worst suspicions. Nearly every house in Meadowbrook Gardens had patio furniture positioned within 3 feet of property lines. Many had decorative lighting that was far more elaborate than his simple string lights. Some had full outdoor kitchen setups with grills, counters, and seating areas positioned right against fence lines. David took photos of everything. He documented addresses, took measurements, and made notes about the differences between his property and others. By the end of his survey, he had evidence of at least 30 properties that had the exact same violations he was being cited for. The next week brought a new low point. David was getting ready for work on Tuesday morning when he heard a loud crash from his backyard. He ran outside to find that someone had knocked over his recycling bin, spilling bottles and cans across his patio. Fresh boot prints in the soft soil of his flower bed told the story. Someone had been walking around his property early that morning, before David was awake. The prints led from his gate to his recycling area to several spots along his fence line. David checked his security camera footage. At 6:30 a.m., while it was still dark, the HOA patrol guard had entered his backyard using a flashlight. The man had spent nearly 20 minutes examining different areas of David's property, apparently looking for violations. In the process, he had knocked over the recycling bin and trampled through David's carefully maintained flower bed. David called the HOA office immediately. Meadowbrook Gardens, HOA. This is Janet speaking. This is David Thompson from 1247 Oak Lane. I need to file a complaint about your patrol service. What seems to be the problem, Mr. Thompson? Your guard entered my private property without permission this morning and damaged my landscaping and recycling area. There was a pause. Well, Mr. Thompson, our patrol service has authority to inspect properties for compliance violations. Authority to inspect from public areas, yes, but not authority to trespass on private property and damage personal belongings. I'll make a note of your complaint, sir. I want to speak with someone in charge. This harassment has gone on long enough. Harassment is a very strong word, Mr. Thompson. Our patrol service provides valuable security for the community. Security? Your guard spent 20 minutes in my backyard at 6 in the morning, looking for violations to cite me for. How is that security? I'll pass your concerns along to the board of directors. When can I expect to hear back? The board meets monthly. Your complaint will be addressed at the next meeting. That's 3 weeks away. That's our standard procedure, sir. Is there anything else I can help you with today? David hung up, frustrated by the runaround. He spent the afternoon researching HOA laws in his state and discovered that homeowners had more rights than he had realized. HOAs could not simply enter private property without notice. They could not single out individual homeowners for harassment, and they were required to apply rules fairly and consistently. He also learned that he could request copies of all violation notices issued by the HOA for the past year. This would show whether other homeowners were being cited for the same violations he was receiving. David submitted a formal written request for these records, citing state open records laws. The response he received 2 weeks later was eye-opening. In the past 12 months, the HOA had issued 127 violation notices to homeowners in Meadowbrook Gardens. Of those 127 notices, 89 had been sent to David's address. The remaining 38 were spread across the other 247 houses in the subdivision. David was receiving more than 70% of all violation notices in a community of nearly 250 homes. The pattern was so obvious that even a casual observer would recognize it as targeted harassment. Armed with this evidence, David decided to attend the next HOA board meeting. He prepared a presentation with photos, documentation, and a timeline of events. He was ready to present his case and demand fair treatment. The meeting was held in the community center on a Tuesday evening. David arrived early and was surprised to see only 4 other homeowners in attendance, plus the 5 board members. When the time came for homeowner comments, David stood up and began presenting his case. He showed photos of his property compared to others. He presented the violation statistics. He played audio recordings of his phone calls with the HOA office. The board listened politely, but their response was disappointing. "Mr. Thompson," said the board president, a stern woman named Patricia Wells, "we appreciate your concerns, but our patrol service is simply doing their job. If your property is receiving more attention, perhaps it's because it requires more attention. But the photos clearly show that other properties have identical conditions that aren't being cited. Every property is unique. Mr. Thompson, what might be acceptable in one location might not be acceptable in another. That's not how HOA rules work. They're supposed to be applied equally to all residents. We apply our rules as we see fit. Mr. Thompson, if you're unhappy with our enforcement, perhaps this community isn't the right fit for you." David felt his face flush with anger. The implication was clear: conform or leave. "I have rights as a homeowner and as a member of this HOA," David said. "I'm asking for fair treatment, not special treatment." "And you're receiving fair treatment," replied another board member. "Perhaps you should focus more on maintaining your property and less on what your neighbors are doing." David left the meeting feeling defeated but more determined than ever. The board had essentially admitted that they had no intention of treating him fairly. They were comfortable with the harassment and saw nothing wrong with singling him out. That night, David sat at his computer and began researching lawyers who specialized in HOA disputes. He also started looking into his state's fair housing laws and anti-discrimination statutes. If the board wanted to play hardball, he was ready to fight back. But first, he needed more evidence. The documentation he had was good, but he needed something that would be undeniable in court. David decided it was time to upgrade his security system and start recording every interaction with the HOA patrol. He had no idea that the situation was about to get much worse before it got better. David spent the weekend after the board meeting installing a comprehensive security camera system. He positioned cameras to cover every angle of his property, including hidden corners where the HOA patrol liked to conduct their extended examinations. He also installed motion sensors and upgraded to a system that would automatically save footage to cloud storage. But the cameras were just the beginning of his plan. David had been thinking about the situation differently since the board meeting. The HOA and their patrol service seemed determined to make his life miserable through official channels. Every legal avenue he had tried had been met with bureaucratic stonewalling and veiled threats. It was clear that playing by their rules was getting him nowhere. That's when David remembered a conversation he had with his college roommate Chris, who worked as an electrical contractor. They had been talking about home security systems when Chris mentioned some of the creative solutions he had installed for clients dealing with trespassing problems. David called Chris on Sunday evening. "Hey buddy, remember when you were telling me about those electric fence systems for residential properties?" "Yeah, what about them? Are they legal for homeowners to install?" "Absolutely, as long as you follow local codes and put up proper warning signs. Lots of people use them for property security. Why, you having problems with trespassers?" David explained his situation with the HOA patrol. Chris listened without interrupting, occasionally making sounds of disbelief. "Man, that's harassment, plain and simple," Chris said when David finished. "And yeah, an electric fence system would definitely solve your trespassing problem. The shock isn't dangerous, it's like touching an electric fence at a farm. Startling and uncomfortable, but harmless. What would something like that involve? It's actually pretty simple. Low voltage system that runs along your existing fence. When someone touches the fence, they get a quick shock. Nothing dangerous, but definitely memorable. The key is proper warning signs. You have to clearly mark that the fence is electrified. Is it expensive? For a property your size? Maybe $800 to $1,000 in materials. I could install it in a weekend." David thought about it for a moment. The HOA had made it clear they had no intention of respecting his property rights or treating him fairly. Maybe it was time to send a different kind of message. "Let me do some research on the local laws and get back to you." David spent the next week researching electric fence regulations in his city and county. What he found was encouraging. Residential electric fencing was completely legal as long as it met certain requirements. The voltage had to be below specific limits. Warning signs had to be posted every 10 feet, and the system had to be installed according to electrical codes. David also discovered that his city had recently updated their property protection laws, specifically allowing homeowners to install electric fencing in response to an increase in property crimes. The law was designed to help homeowners protect their property when other methods had failed. Perfect. David called Chris back and scheduled the installation for the following weekend. In the meantime, he visited the city planning office to apply for the electrical permit he would need. The clerk was helpful and even provided him with a template for the required warning signs. Installing this because of security concerns? The clerk asked as David filled out the paperwork. Trespassing issues, David replied. People keep entering my property without permission despite repeated requests to stop. Yeah, that's exactly what this law was designed for. Just make sure you follow the signage requirements and you'll be all set. The permit was approved within 3 days. David picked up his materials from the electrical supply store and spent Thursday evening reading through installation manuals and safety requirements. Friday afternoon, Chris arrived with his tools and got to work examining David's existing fence to plan the installation. This is going to work perfectly, Chris said as he walked the perimeter. Your fence is wood with metal posts, which is ideal for this kind of system. We'll run the wire along the top rail and connect it to the existing posts. How strong will the shock be? Strong enough to get someone's attention, but not enough to cause injury. Think of it like touching a doorknob after walking across carpet in winter. Surprising and uncomfortable, but harmless. They worked all day Saturday installing the system. Chris ran low-voltage wiring along the entire fence perimeter, connected it to a control box in David's garage, and installed proper grounding. The system was designed to deliver a brief shock when someone touched the fence, then reset automatically. Sunday was spent installing the warning signs. David placed them every 8 feet along the fence, clearly visible from both inside and outside his property. The signs read, "Warning, electric fence, do not touch," in bold red letters. This should definitely solve your trespassing problem, Chris said as they finished up. Anyone who ignores those warning signs and touches your fence is going to get a memorable lesson about respecting private property. What if someone claims they didn't see the signs? That's why we put up so many of them. Nobody can honestly claim they didn't notice warnings posted every 8 feet. Plus, you've got your security cameras recording everything, so you'll have proof that the signs were clearly visible. David tested the system carefully, using an insulated tool to touch the fence wire. The shock was immediate but brief, definitely startling but not painful or dangerous. Perfect, David said. When do I tell the HOA about this? You don't have to tell them anything, Chris replied. It's your property. You have the proper permits and you've followed all the safety requirements. The warning signs are clearly posted. Anyone who gets shocked has only themselves to blame for ignoring the warnings. That evening, David sat on his back patio and looked at his newly protected fence. The warning signs were clearly visible, the system was properly installed and permitted, and his security cameras were recording everything. For the first time in months, he felt like he had some control over his situation. He knew the HOA patrol would be back Tuesday morning, as they had been every week for the past 3 months. The guard had developed a routine of leaning against David's fence while he conducted his extended inspections. This Tuesday was going to be different. David spent Monday evening reviewing the security camera footage from previous weeks. The pattern was consistent. The guard would park in front of his house, walk around the property taking notes, then spend 10 to 15 minutes leaning against the fence while peering into the backyard. In several videos, David could see the guard actually gripping the top rail of the fence with his hands as he leaned over to get a better view. Sometimes the man would rest his elbow on the fence while writing on his clipboard. It was exactly the kind of contact that would trigger the electric fence system. David also reviewed the legal requirements one more time. The warning signs were properly posted and clearly visible. The system was installed according to code with the proper permits. The voltage was within legal limits. Everything was completely by the book. Tuesday morning arrived with clear skies and crisp fall air. David made his coffee and settled into his home office, positioning himself where he could see his security monitors. The cameras showed empty streets and his peaceful backyard. At 9:20 a.m., the familiar white patrol car pulled up in front of David's house. David watched his monitors as the guard got out of his car with his clipboard and camera. The man began his usual routine, examining the mailbox and front yard before walking around to the side of the house. David could see the warning signs clearly in the camera footage. They were bright, visible, and impossible to miss. The guard walked right past 3 of them as he approached the fence line. David's heart started beating faster as he watched the guard position himself at his usual spot along the fence. The man was looking at his clipboard, apparently preparing to begin his extended observation session. Then, without even glancing at the warning sign directly in front of him, the guard casually leaned forward and placed his hand on the top rail of the fence. The electric fence system worked exactly as designed. David watched through his security camera as the guard suddenly jerked backward, dropped his clipboard, and began hopping around while shaking his hand. The man's face showed a mixture of shock, confusion, and anger. David couldn't help but smile as he watched the guard look around frantically, apparently trying to figure out what had just happened. The man's eyes finally focused on the warning sign right in front of him, and David could see the moment of realization cross his face. The guard picked up his scattered papers and clipboard, gave the fence a wide berth, and stalked back to his patrol car. He sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, apparently making phone calls and writing notes. David's phone rang 20 minutes later. "Mr. Thompson, this is Patricia Wells from the HOA board. We need to discuss a serious safety concern regarding your property." "What kind of safety concern?" "Our patrol officer was injured during a routine inspection this morning. He received an electrical shock from your fence. Was he not able to read the warning signs? They're posted every 8 feet and clearly visible." "That's not the point. Mr. Thompson, you cannot install dangerous electrical systems on your property without notifying the HOA. Actually, Mrs. Wells, I can install any legal safety system on my private property that I choose. The electric fence is properly permitted by the city and meets all safety requirements. The warning signs clearly mark the hazard. This is completely unacceptable. You'll be hearing from our legal department." "I look forward to it," David replied. "And Mrs. Wells, your patrol officer was trespassing on my private property. Next time, he might want to respect both my property rights and my warning signs." David hung up the phone and reviewed the security footage one more time. Everything was captured in perfect detail. The clearly visible warning signs, the guard's decision to ignore them, and the immediate consequence of that choice. For the first time in months, David felt like he was finally fighting back effectively. David decided to take a personal day from work on Wednesday. He had a feeling the HOA would escalate things quickly after their patrol guard got shocked, and he wanted to be home to handle whatever came next. He wasn't disappointed. At 10:15 a.m., David's doorbell rang. He looked through his security monitor and saw 2 police officers standing on his front porch. His stomach dropped, but he reminded himself that he had followed every law and regulation when installing the electric fence. David opened the door and greeted the officers politely. "Good morning, officers. How can I help you?" "Morning, sir. I'm Officer Rodriguez, and this is Officer Kim. We received a complaint about an electrical hazard on your property. Someone reported that a person was shocked by your fence yesterday." "Yes, that's correct. The HOA patrol guard ignored multiple warning signs and touched my electric fence system. Can you show us this fence system?" "Absolutely. It's a legal residential electric fence, properly permitted and installed according to city code." David led the officers to his backyard, pointing out the warning signs along the way. As you can see, there are warning signs posted every 8 feet along the entire fence perimeter. The system is designed for property protection and operates within legal voltage limits. Officer Rodriguez examined one of the warning signs closely. These are pretty clear. Hard to miss. The installation was done by a licensed electrician, and I have all the proper permits from the city, David added. I can show you the paperwork if you'd like. Officer Kim was looking at the fence posts and wiring. What prompted you to install this system? Repeated trespassing by the HOA patrol. They've been entering my property without permission for months, despite my requests that they stop. I documented everything before installing the fence. David showed the officers some of his security footage from previous weeks, including the video of the guard entering his backyard without permission and damaging his property. So this person was trespassing when they got shocked? Officer Rodriguez asked. Correct. And they walked past multiple warning signs to do it. The officers spent another 10 minutes examining the fence system and reviewing David's permits. They also watched the security footage from Tuesday morning, which clearly showed the guard ignoring the warning signs. Well, Mr. Thompson, everything appears to be legal and properly installed, Officer Kim said finally. The person who was shocked was trespassing on your property and ignored clearly posted warnings. We'll include that in our report. Will there be any charges filed? David asked. Not against you. Your fence system is legal and properly marked. The person who got shocked was trespassing and ignored safety warnings. That's on them. After the officers left, David felt relieved but knew this was far from over. The HOA had escalated to calling the police, which meant they were serious about fighting him. He spent the afternoon reviewing his documentation and preparing for whatever came next. He didn't have to wait long. Thursday morning brought a certified letter from the HOA's legal department. David signed for it and opened it immediately. The letter was full of legal language, but the message was clear. The HOA was demanding that he remove the electric fence system within 7 days or face legal action. David called the lawyer he had consulted a few weeks earlier. Mr. Thompson, I've been expecting your call, said attorney Janet Morrison. I heard about your electric fence situation through the legal community grapevine. The HOA is threatening to sue me if I don't remove it. On what grounds? They claim it's a safety hazard and violates HOA covenants. Did you review your HOA agreement before installing the fence? Yes. There's nothing in the covenants that prohibits security systems or electric fencing. The only requirement is that modifications be reasonable and legal. And your fence system is both reasonable and legal. You have permits, proper installation, and clear warning signs. Plus, you installed it in response to ongoing trespassing issues. So what should I do about their legal threat? Let me handle it. I'll respond to their letter and explain why their position has no legal merit. In the meantime, don't remove the fence and don't admit any wrongdoing. David felt better after talking to his lawyer, but he knew the fight was just beginning. He spent the rest of Thursday reviewing his security camera footage and organizing his documentation. He wanted to be prepared for whatever the HOA threw at him next. Friday morning brought another surprise. David was drinking his coffee when he saw a news van pull up in front of his house. A reporter and cameraman got out and began setting up equipment on the sidewalk. David's phone rang immediately. Mr. Thompson, this is Linda Chang from Channel 7 News. We'd like to speak with you about your dispute with the Meadowbrook Gardens HOA. How did you hear about this? We received a tip about an interesting property rights case involving electric fencing and HOA harassment. Would you be willing to share your story? David thought about it for a moment. The HOA had been counting on keeping this quiet and handling it through their usual intimidation tactics. Maybe some public attention would change their approach. I'd be happy to tell my story. David spent an hour with the news crew, explaining the months of harassment he had endured and showing them the documentation he had collected. He demonstrated how clearly the warning signs were posted and explained the legal requirements he had followed when installing the fence. So when the guard got shocked, he was trespassing on your property? The reporter asked. Correct. He had ignored multiple clearly posted warning signs and was on my private property without permission. The security camera footage shows everything. What's your message to other homeowners who might be facing similar HOA problems? Know your rights. Document everything. And don't let bullies intimidate you into giving up your legal rights as a property owner. The story aired that evening during the 6 o'clock news. David watched from his living room as the reporter described his situation and showed footage of his warning signs and fence system. The story portrayed David as a homeowner fighting back against HOA harassment using legal means. The story also included a brief statement from the HOA, claiming that David had installed a dangerous system without proper approval. But when the reporter mentioned that David had all proper permits and that the guard was trespassing when shocked, the HOA's position looked unreasonable. David's phone started ringing immediately after the story aired. Friends, coworkers, and even strangers called to express support. Several people shared their own HOA horror stories and praised David for standing up for homeowner rights. Saturday morning brought the most interesting call of all. Mr. Thompson, this is Robert Chen, an investigative reporter with the Metro Daily newspaper. I saw the TV story about your HOA situation. I've been investigating Meadowbrook Gardens HOA for several months based on other complaints I've received. Other complaints? You're not the only homeowner who's been targeted for harassment. I've documented at least 12 other cases of selective enforcement and discriminatory treatment. Your case is just the most recent. What kind of cases? Similar patterns. Excessive inspections, violations that other homeowners aren't cited for. Targeting of specific residents while ignoring identical violations by others. The evidence suggests systematic harassment by the HOA board and their patrol service. Are you planning to write about this? I'm working on a comprehensive investigation. Your case could be the centerpiece, especially since you have such detailed documentation. Would you be willing to share your evidence for the story? David agreed to meet with the reporter the following week. He realized that his individual fight with the HOA was part of a much larger pattern of abuse. Maybe exposing that pattern would help not just him, but other homeowners who were being targeted. Sunday was quiet, giving David time to reflect on how dramatically his situation had changed in just 1 week. The electric fence had accomplished exactly what he had hoped. It stopped the trespassing and forced the HOA to show their true colors. Instead of backing down when faced with legal consequences for their harassment, the HOA had doubled down and escalated. They had called the police, threatened legal action, and tried to intimidate David into removing his legal property protection system. But their tactics had backfired. The police found no wrongdoing on David's part. The media attention was making the HOA look unreasonable and vindictive, and the investigative reporter's interest suggested that David's case was part of a larger scandal. David looked out his kitchen window at his electric fence with its clearly posted warning signs. The system had worked perfectly, both as a deterrent to trespassing and as a way to expose the HOA's true nature. Monday would bring new developments, he was sure. But for the first time since moving to Meadowbrook Gardens, David felt like he was winning. Monday morning started with another certified letter, but this one wasn't from the HOA. It was from the city's code enforcement department, and David's heart sank as he opened it. Had the HOA found a way to get the city involved? His fears were quickly replaced by relief as he read the letter. The city had conducted their own investigation of David's electric fence system following the police report. Their finding was clear. The installation met all code requirements, was properly permitted, and posed no safety hazard to the public. The letter even included a paragraph that seemed aimed directly at the HOA. Property owners have the legal right to install approved security systems on their private property. Electric fence systems that meet code requirements and include proper warning signage are explicitly permitted for residential use. David called his lawyer immediately to share the good news. "This is excellent," Attorney Morrison said. "The city's blessing gives us even stronger grounds to fight the HOA's demands. They can't claim your fence violates safety codes when the city has explicitly approved it. What's our next step?" "I'm preparing a comprehensive response to their legal threat. We'll cite the city's approval, your property rights, their pattern of harassment, and the fact that their guard was trespassing when he got shocked. I think they'll back down once they realize how weak their position is." But David's phone rang again before he could celebrate. This time it was Robert Chen, the investigative reporter. "Mr. Thompson, I've got some interesting news. 3 more Meadowbrook Gardens homeowners contacted me after seeing the TV story about your fence. They want to share their own experiences with HOA harassment, similar to mine. Nearly identical patterns, excessive inspections, violations that other residents aren't cited for, intimidation tactics. One homeowner has been fighting them for 2 years. Another was forced to spend thousands of dollars on violations that turned out to be bogus. Are you still planning to write the story?" "Absolutely. But it's bigger than I originally thought. I want to do a full investigation of the Meadowbrook Gardens HOA's practices. Would you be willing to be interviewed on the record?" David agreed to meet with the reporter that afternoon. By the time their interview was finished, David realized his case was part of a much larger scandal that had been brewing for years. According to Chen's research, the current HOA board had been systematically targeting homeowners they viewed as problematic, while giving preferential treatment to others. The pattern was subtle but consistent. Certain residents received excessive scrutiny while identical violations by others were ignored. The electric fence incident is perfect because it demonstrates their mindset, Chen explained. Instead of addressing the trespassing behavior that prompted you to install it, they're trying to punish you for protecting your property rights. When will your story run? I'm hoping for this Sunday's edition. It'll be the front page of the Metro section. Tuesday brought another surprise. David was working from home when his doorbell rang at 2 p.m. He checked his security monitor and saw a woman in a business suit standing on his porch. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Sandra Williams from the state's Fair Housing Commission. We'd like to discuss your situation with the Meadowbrook Gardens HOA." David invited her in, confused about why fair housing would be involved. We've received complaints suggesting that the HOA may be engaging in discriminatory enforcement practices, Williams explained. Your case has drawn attention to patterns that concern us. Discriminatory how? Selective enforcement of rules based on factors that may violate fair housing laws. We're conducting a preliminary investigation. Williams spent an hour reviewing David's documentation and security footage. She was particularly interested in the statistics showing that David had received more than 70% of all violation notices issued in the community. This kind of disproportionate enforcement can indicate discrimination, she said. We'll be examining all of the HOA's enforcement actions for the past 2 years. What happens if you find discrimination? We can impose fines, require policy changes, and mandate fair housing training. In severe cases, we can seek federal intervention. Wednesday brought the best news yet. David's lawyer called with an update. The HOA just contacted me. They want to discuss a settlement. What kind of settlement? They're backing down on demanding removal of your fence. They also want to discuss resolving your other complaints. Why the sudden change? My guess is they're getting pressure from multiple directions. The media attention, the state investigation, the investigative reporter. It's making them nervous. David agreed to attend a settlement meeting the following week, but he wasn't ready to let the HOA off the hook that easily. They had put him through months of harassment and stress. A simple agreement to leave him alone wasn't enough. Thursday evening, David received an unexpected phone call. Mr. Thompson, this is Patricia Wells from the HOA board. I'm calling to apologize for the misunderstanding about your fence. Misunderstanding? We realize now that your fence installation was legal and proper. We're prepared to withdraw our objection. What about the months of harassment before the fence? There was a pause. We're willing to discuss comprehensive resolution of all issues, including reimbursement for my legal fees and the costs of the security system I was forced to install. That would be part of the discussion. And changes to ensure other homeowners don't face the same treatment. We're open to reviewing our enforcement procedures. David could hear the defeat in her voice. The HOA was clearly feeling pressure from multiple investigations and bad publicity. Friday brought the preliminary results of the state fair housing investigation. Sandra Williams called to update David. We've found significant evidence of discriminatory enforcement patterns. The HOA will be required to implement new policies and undergo fair housing training. What about compensation for affected homeowners? That will be part of the settlement negotiations. The HOA is facing potential federal charges if they don't cooperate. Saturday morning, David was enjoying his coffee on the back patio when he noticed something different. The white HOA patrol car drove slowly past his house, just like it had every Tuesday for months. But this time the guard didn't stop. He didn't park. He didn't get out to conduct an inspection. He just drove past and continued down the street. David smiled as he looked at his electric fence with its bright warning signs. The system had worked perfectly, not just as a deterrent to trespassing, but as a catalyst that exposed the HOA's entire pattern of abuse. Sunday's newspaper featured Robert Chen's investigative story on the front page of the Metro section. The headline read, "Electric Fence Sparks Investigation into HOA Harassment." The story detailed not just David's case, but a broader pattern of discriminatory enforcement by the Meadowbrook Gardens Board. The article included interviews with 5 other homeowners who had faced similar harassment. It documented the disproportionate enforcement statistics, and it quoted the state fair housing official confirming their investigation. David's phone rang constantly throughout the day. Neighbors he had never met called to thank him for fighting back. Other HOA victims from around the city reached out for advice. Local TV stations wanted follow-up interviews. The following week's settlement meeting was almost anticlimactic. The HOA board, facing state sanctions and federal investigation, agreed to David's demands. They would reimburse his legal fees and the cost of his security system. They would implement new enforcement policies reviewed by the state. And they would issue formal apologies to all affected homeowners. Most importantly, the board president and 2 other members resigned, replaced by homeowners committed to fair and consistent enforcement. 6 months later, David was still living peacefully in Meadowbrook Gardens. The HOA patrol still conducted their rounds, but they followed standardized procedures and treated all residents equally. David's electric fence remained in place, though it was rarely needed anymore. The investigative story had sparked a statewide review of HOA practices, leading to new laws protecting homeowner rights. David had become an accidental advocate for HOA reform, speaking at community meetings and helping other homeowners fight back against harassment. As David sat on his patio one evening, looking at his electric fence with its warning signs, he reflected on how one simple act of standing up for his rights had changed everything. The fence had delivered more than just electric shocks. It had delivered justice. The HOA had learned a valuable lesson about respecting property rights and treating residents fairly. And David had learned that sometimes the best way to deal with bullies is to show them that their victims can shock them right back.